Since the release of Persona 5, the Persona series has grown to a titan of its genre. Its sales will never rival a Call of Duty, but for a 100-hour-long anime game where most of the gameplay is getting to know people, it's become unbelievably successful. It's the kind of breakthrough into the mainstream of gaming culture that opens the floodgates for other games, both new and old, to reach new audiences. Truly, Persona 5 has become such a flagship game that it receives credit for things it borrowed from other places. A game with a calendar? Wow, that's like Persona 5. A game about talking and dating? This feels like Persona 5. Jazz? You mean Persona 5 music? But Persona 5 isn't the genesis of these things, obviously. It's just a place where so many people first experienced them. Not me, though. Like any self-respecting hardcore gamer, I liked this thing before it was cool. I loved Persona all the way back when it began, with the first game in the series, Persona 3. Persona 3 is my favorite video game. Video games are my favorite thing. Therefore, Persona 3 is my favorite thing. How do you make a video where you talk about your favorite thing without making the audience feel like they're trapped talking to the most annoying person at the party? I don't think I can, so I won't try. Instead, I will be exhaustingly thorough. From here on out, I'd like to talk to you about Persona 3 from every possible angle. Its origins, its design, its aesthetics, its writing, its story, its music, its strengths, its weaknesses, and how all those things connected with me enough to hold this game above all others. Persona is one of the few examples of a spin-off or sub-series outgrowing the franchise that spawned it. It began as one of the many varieties of Shin Megami Tensei games, a series that itself spun off of and outgrew its parent series, Megami Tensei. The series is essentially Pokemon before Pokemon, but also for adults, having players battle alongside and against demons from all kinds of mythologies. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, Atlus was pumping out Shin Megami Tensei games left and right, pairing it with different settings and tones to make a franchise that is simultaneously diverse and consistent. There was post-apocalypse SMT, cyberpunk SMT, historical SMT, other post-apocalypse SMT, even funny headache SMT. The mashup that ultimately came out on top was, of course, high school SMT, with the title Shin Megami Tensei If, but that game wasn't very good, so the concept was used again in the much better Shin Megami Tensei Persona. There's a prevalent joke in Persona fan communities that the series starts with the third game. This is because Persona 1 and 2 have about as much in common with 3, 4, and 5 as they do with any other SMT sub-series. The first two games established some concepts that would carry on to the future, such as the setting, shadow doppelgangers, and the Velvet Room. Most important is the use of Jungian psychology. The collective unconscious is a concept that became essential to 3, 4, and 5, even more than it was in 1 and 2. Not to mention the titular personas, which are based on Carl Jung's concept of, well, personas. The different masks people wear to fit into different situations. Without the use of Jungian psychology, I don't see why Persona 3 wouldn't have been its own spin-off series, just as Persona 1 spun off of Megami Tensei. All that to say, the prevalent notion is entirely justified. For all intents and purposes, the Persona games since Persona 3 are a separate franchise. Persona 3 refreshed the franchise with a whole new aesthetic, narrative focus, mechanics, and structure. If Persona 3 was a new beginning, then naturally, it should be about death. Death is the core of Persona 3. Not in a Dark Souls way where the game is punishing, in a thematic and narrative way. If you laid out Persona 3's story, you'd see that it is about the way humans deal with death. If you laid out each character, you would see their arcs are about how death has affected them. Often this is very literal, people dealing with the deaths of others, but is just as often about death in a more philosophical sense. In addition to Jungian psychology, Persona 3 roots itself deeply in tarot, the set of cards often used in fortune-telling. Different cards in the tarot deck represent different arcana, aspects of life and reality that can be highlighted when a fortune is read. Each arcana can be interpreted in multiple ways, but they have a consistent theme to them. The Empress, for example, usually refers to motherhood, while the Wheel of Fortune suggests some unexpected twist of fate. The 13th arcana is death. Death can of course mean dying, but in a broader sense it means something is coming to an end. On the other hand, it can also mean something new is about to begin, now that the old has gone away. See, I wasn't kidding. Death really is a natural topic for a franchise reboot. Persona 3 tackles all these interpretations of death in some subtle and not so subtle ways, and it wastes no time in letting the player know that. Allow me to outline the first few minutes of the game. In 1999, in the Japanese city of Iwatodai, an industrial disaster left a young child an orphan. 10 years later, that child returned to the city to attend Gekkoukan High. This is where the player meets the protagonist of Persona 3. Hair covering one eye, usually wearing headphones, it's clear that their life since the accident had left them disconnected from the world. So disconnected is this teen that they barely take notice of the green moon in the sky, blood on the streets, and coffins standing upright as they walk into their new dorm. Meanwhile, another teen is seen holding a gun to her head, hyperventilating. When our protagonist arrives at the dorm, they're greeted by a small boy who says some cryptic, ominous things that our hero barely reacts to. The young girl with the gun then greets him, the creepy child seemingly disappearing upon her arrival. Dead parents, coffins, and blood are all well and good, but not many games would put teen suicide imagery right up front like that. Could you imagine if a game not only did that, but then would feature literally hundreds of instances of teens shooting themselves?
What's your suicide style? Side of the head? Front of the head? Victorious? Regal?
Detractors of Persona 3 might describe the game as edgy. Edgy, in my opinion, describes the kind of things a 13-year-old boy thinks are cool or transgressive. Brooding characters who dual-wield pistols and 3 swords, excessive blood and gore, a general disregard for human life, or idolization about the act of killing. That kind of thing. Its use is a little more broad nowadays than that definition, but that's the core of what it evokes. I've always felt unsure of the term, though. I find that the line between honest yet dark and simply edgy is fuzzy, ever-changing, and often lies in the eye of the beholder. My favorite way to explain this is through the My Chemical Romance album, Welcome to the Black Parade. When I was a teen, I scoffed at the people who listened to that music. The overblown nature in which serious topics were dealt with, the extravagant presentation and screaming about sadness and pain, it all felt fake to me. I thought it was edgy. Then, when I got to college and some more things happened in my life, I gave the album an earnest listen. Now a young adult, I had the perspective to realize that these songs were made by adults. It's hard to make music filled with that much pain and sorrow without pulling from your own well of those feelings. I had been surrounded by edgy teenagers who loved this stuff, and my perception of it was colored by that. As an adult, I had the clarity to realize where these songs came from. The real reason Welcome to the Black Parade went from edgy to honest in my eyes, though, is that I could now relate to it. When I was younger, I was blissfully ignorant of how deep sadness could go, so I couldn't imagine feeling so low that this kind of presentation was justified. Now, those songs feel perfectly realistic. Long story short, if you think something's edgy, consider that maybe you're just a really happy person. So no, despite the coffins, blood, and admittedly egregious use of suicidal imagery,
Whoa, Akihiko with the reverse grip.
I can't say that Persona 3 is edgy, though maybe I wish I could. The day after their arrival, the protagonist begins to attend their new high school, and the vibe of Persona 3 shifts rapidly. It's hard to think about whatever might have happened the night before when you have a new school to adjust to. The girl with the gun, Yukari Takeba, walks to school with you and shows you around. She just so happens to be in the same homeroom as the player, and their proximity immediately sparks rumors amongst the student body that the two of you are dating. How scandalous, the popular girl and the new kid. Also in your homeroom is Junpei Iori, a quintessential teenage boy whose facial hair makes him look about 7 years older than he is. Yukari doesn't seem to be a huge fan of Junpei, but at the same time, she doesn't seem to really dislike him. There's flashes of all the school has to offer. Art clubs led by a kid with glasses, sports teams that a kid wearing a tracksuit seems to live for, a student council whose members take their job a little too seriously, a kid with blonde hair who is definitely not Japanese. Gekkoukan has a lot to offer, and the new school year is a great opportunity to get to know it better. Things don't stay so normal for too long. Only one day later is there another supernatural incident. The dorm the player is placed in is actually reserved for members of a secret club called SEAS, short for Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad. These are the students who have the potential to summon personas, manifestations of their inner selves that grant them supernatural powers. Superpowers are cool, but unfortunately SEAS is called an execution squad for a reason. Iwatodai is plagued by creatures called shadows, and Persona users are the only ones capable of defeating them. The protagonist learns all of this the hard way. At the stroke of midnight, the world returns to that eerie state from the night they arrived. This is called the Dark Hour, a secret 25th hour of the day in which the shadows manifest and personas can be summoned. Anyone who doesn't have the potential to summon personas is trapped in a coffin, comatose, and has no recollection of the Dark Hour once it ends. A massive shadow heads directly for the dorm, and Yukari tries to help the player escape to the roof while more experienced members of SEAS hold it off. The creature clambers up the building to greet them there. Yukari pulls out her gun and points it at her head, deciding whatever's about to happen isn't worth it and she'll just die instead. Not really. This gun of hers is actually called an evoker, and it's a device that SEES members use to aid in the summoning of their personas. The idea is that personas can only be summoned under extreme stress, and the act of putting a gun to your head and pulling the trigger heightens the user's emotions enough to call their persona. Is that a stupid explanation? No, it's cool. Evokers rule, and I won't elaborate further. Anyway, Yukari can't manage it, but something in the protagonist lets him use the evoker on instinct, summoning his persona and defeating the giant shadow. They then become a member of SEES and learn its mission: to climb the Tower of Tartarus and stop the Dark Hour. Deciding how to discuss Persona 3's narrative is a little difficult. While there is an overarching plot, the main story is fairly episodic and sparse. The lead up to each major boss battle has a few scenes setting up the narrative stakes around it, but those stakes rarely have to do with the boss fight itself. The battle just happens to coincide with the climax of that chapter's narrative. Many people point to this as an example of how Persona 3's story is weaker than the other entries in the series, but really it's just a different set of priorities. The core conflict provides a framework to push the game forward, but is open enough to fill the bulk of the game with its real focus: the characters. Yukari and Junpei are the first to fight alongside the protagonist, but over the course of the game, SEES grows considerably. There is Mitsuru Kirijo, the daughter of a rich CEO who serves as both the captain of SEES as well as Gekkoukan's student council president. Another upperclassman, Akihiko Sanada, joined Mitsuru in becoming SEES' first members. Akihiko is an incredibly focused individual who centers his life around getting stronger. Yukari was the last to join SEES before the player, and as such still feels unsure of her place in the group, as well as how dedicated she is to the cause. That isn't an issue for Junpei, who lets his acceptance into the secret club go straight to his head. It often seems like he thinks the whole thing is just a way to have fun. Later, the group's navigation and support role is filled by Fuka Yamagishi, a second-year student who excels in her academics, but lacks any kind of backbone and is easily pushed around. Fuka's the last somewhat normal addition to the team. From then on, SEES gets more eccentric. A robot named Aigis is the next to join. She was created by the Kirijo group, run by Mitsuru's father, specifically to exterminate shadows. Then there's Koromaru, who is a little dog. Ken Amada is at least human, but at the age of 10, he's hardly someone you would expect to be recruited to fight monsters. The final member of the group is Shinjiro Aragaki, a delinquent and lifelong friend of Akihiko who left SEES before the protagonist's arrival. Circumstances cause him to rejoin the group, though he certainly doesn't seem happy about it. Fans of Persona 4 and 5 who played Persona 3 last might find an issue with this group compared to the parties of the other games. Whereas 4 and 5 feature tight-knit friends and allies, Persona 3's party are not friends. They have grudges, major disagreements, they bicker, and they hardly ever spend time with each other outside of their fight against the shadows. The members of SEES are simply co-workers. They're a less fun group, but their strictly professional relationship grants the opportunity for the kind of interactions those other games simply couldn't have. An early highlight of this dynamic is between Yukari and Mitsuru. From the game's earliest moments, Yukari acts strangely around Mitsuru. When the council president leaves the room, Yukari tends to make snide remarks or scoff. Initially, this animosity seems to stem from jealousy, Yukari feeling insecure in the presence of someone who seems so perfect and popular. She expresses disdain for Mitsuru's holier-than-thou attitude, but won't say anything to her face. Mitsuru, on the other hand, has no negative feelings for Yukari whatsoever, and her perfect reputation is a source of stress for her, not pride. Yukari comes off as a stereotypical teenage girl as a result, two-faced and superficial. In reality, the source of Yukari's anger is much deeper. Her father, who passed away when she was young, was a scientist that worked for the Kirijo group. Yukari believes what happened to her father was the company's fault, and she channels that anger to the only Kirijo in her vicinity. She only joined SEES when she learned that it was funded by the Kirijo group, hoping to use the team as a way to get to the truth of her father's death. I find dynamics like this allow SEES to make a more lasting impression on me than the groups of Persona 4 and 5, but not just because of the conflict. The conflict is simply a way for the group to forge a true bond with each other. Only after everyone clashes against each other, only after all the grievances are aired, can they overcome and accept their inner demons. The transition from acquaintance to friend is a process that happens gradually across the whole game in a way that makes these friendships feel real. By the time SEES becomes as close as Persona 4's investigation team or Persona 5's Phantom Thieves, you've seen the work it took to get them there, and you know that the root of their bond is powerful. During the day, Tatsumi Port Island is radiant, and the state-of-the-art Gekkoukan High sits at its center. The sun drenches the city in a unique way. It's not dry like a desert, it's not warm and inviting like a summer vacation, it's shimmering and clean like a brand new laptop. It feels as artificial as a man-made island should. The stark contrast with the blinding cleanliness of the city in the day only further makes that first night more unsettling, the extremes of light and dark occupying the same space within the span of a few hours. Persona 3 is all about the ways we hide and deny our darkest feelings, and even the city of Iwatodai itself masks its shadows behind a veneered smile.
With that, it's time for our first installment of FES or Portable. This game has been released several times, and each time there's been some tweaks to it. Unlike other games that get updated versions though, there's no version of Persona 3 that has everything. The two best versions of the game are the updated PS2 release, Persona 3 FES, and the PSP version, Persona 3 Portable. Each version has features the other lacks, sparking endless debate over which version people should play. While it is an old game, strong art direction ensures that Persona 3 is still nice to look at today. You might be asking, then why does all your footage look so bad? Well, that's because I played the recent PC port of Persona 3 Portable. Since it was originally released on a handheld system, Portable heavily pulled back on graphical fidelity, replacing all the explorable 3D environments in the daytime segments with static backgrounds and visual novel conversations. It also removed the animated cutscenes for pivotal story moments. Bummer! Sounds like if you're a stickler for visuals, Portable is not the way to go. The presentation category goes to FES.
The radiance of the daytime isn't just to make the player feel uneasy though. Its positivity also signaled the mechanical dichotomy between Persona 3's days and nights. Persona 3's key departure from the earlier entries is its structure. During the day, Persona 3 is a dating simulator. An often misunderstood genre, dating sims come in many flavors. While many are simple visual novels with limited interactivity, others run on as much number crunching and planning as any good RPG. The latter is the form Persona 3 takes. The player gets to embody a high schooler with all the hangouts, studying, working, and dating that entails. You'll be spending your days meeting and getting closer to people, and bettering yourself. Our protagonist has 3 social stats that he must work to improve: his charm, knowledge, and courage. You might spend extra time studying in the library to raise your knowledge, or watch a horror movie to raise your courage. Increasing these social stats allow you to do more things and talk to more people. After all, the student council president isn't going to talk to some idiot. You gotta make sure you're smart enough to get her attention. It wouldn't be much of a game if you could endlessly improve yourself though, so Persona 3 operates on a calendar. The game takes place over the course of a single year. The days you have are numbered, so you need to effectively manage your time between grinding those social stats and hanging out with people. The hanging out is the biggest chunk of the game. After class, you have the opportunity to spend your time with someone. Doing so will spark some kind of conversation where you learn more about them. Each of these conversations marks a new level in your relationship with them, with each relationship maxing out at rank 10. These connections with others are called your social links. Leveling up your social links is your primary concern, the activity that takes precedence in your schedule above all else. There are gameplay benefits to social links, which I'll discuss later, but for most players, the intrinsic motivation of seeing each character's story is the main driving force to completing them. Seeing all the links to their end is easier said than done, however. Since each social link is their own person, they're only available to spend time with on certain days of the week. Add in the fact that there are only so many time slots available before the game ends, and thorough scheduling becomes a necessity. Say you want to pursue Chihiro from the student council as well as Keisuke from the art club. Each of them are only available 3 days a week, and both of them share Tuesday and Thursday as available days. It'd probably be best to choose one of them to finish first, filling out the other days of the week with social links that have less overlap. When you max out the first one, then replace those days of the week with the next one. There's still more to consider though. Both of these social links are fellow students at GeckoCon, and during the holidays and the lead up to exams, all school social links are unavailable, so you need to make sure you have something outside of school to do on those occasions. It's not enough to simply choose who to hang out with either. The next rank in a social link is only reached when you have earned enough affection through that link. Affection is, with few exceptions, earned by saying the right things during hangouts. Just like real life, the right thing is usually something nice and supportive, but that isn't always the case. You need to be sure you're reading their emotions and disposition correctly. Saying something nice might net you some affection, but saying something more specific to the context of the conversation will earn you more affection. This depends on the person as well. The old monk Mutatsu is jaded and cynical, and saying anything positive usually gets him to insult your naivety. Maxing out Mutatsu's social link requires the player to agree with his pessimism and anger. On top of all this, Persona 3 is still a turn-based RPG. You'll be doing battles against evil creatures, and somehow, these two halves of the game play into each other. Characters do battle by summoning their persona, and the player character gets to use a wide range of them. Each persona is tied to a tarot arcana, which designates what kind of abilities and stats it has. Each social link is also tied to an arcana. Leveling up a social link increases the power of personas with a matching arcana. For example, the sports team manager Yuko's arcana is strength, so as you get to know her better, all strength arcana personas you create become stronger. That feedback does a full circle and becomes a loop. Having a persona with a matching arcana of someone you spend time with gives a bonus to all affection gained. With how tight the calendar of Persona 3 can be, these persona bonuses are all but required to finish all the social links in a single playthrough. This is how the two halves of Persona 3 feed into each other. While Persona 3's days are filled with idyllic high school roleplay, its nights are packed with classic RPG dungeon crawling. SEES has no clear idea of how to stop the Dark Hour, but they do know that the school turns into a massive tower called Tartarus during it. They decide to focus on exploring the tower and training against the shadows that live inside it. This is where the real gameplay of Persona 3 takes place, if you're one of those people that doesn't count menu management and reading as gameplay. Each floor of Tartarus is randomly generated, and the goal is to search and find the stairs taking you to the next floor. Exploring the floor will usually result in finding some items and money, and at least a few battles with shadows. Persona 3's battle system has all the standards for an RPG from Japan. It's a turn-based affair where the player's party is outfitted with a wide range of physical attacks, elemental magic, healing spells, stat buffs and debuffs, and negative conditions they can inflict on enemies. The spin Persona 3 presents on that formula is the One More system. Everyone, friend and foe alike, has a set of elemental weaknesses and resistances. If something is hit by an elemental attack that they are weak to, they'll be knocked down and the attacker gets another turn. If the player manages to exploit the weaknesses of every enemy on the field in a single round, they have the chance to perform an all-out attack in which the whole party storms the battlefield at once, dealing a big chunk of damage to all enemies. This battle system gives the game a real identity in the sea of turn-based RPGs. When I first played Persona 3, I had become weary of the random encounters and repetitive battles of the genre. Maybe that was because I was a stupid teen who didn't play any of the actual good RPGs, but nonetheless, battles were not something I expected much from in this game. I ended up loving the One More system so much that it revitalized my love of the genre, and I think that love can be attributed to one thing: momentum. The One More system lets the player circumvent the pleasantries of a turn-based system, putting off the enemy's turn as long as possible. There's a constant build-up on each turn, as you learn the enemy's traits, hone in on their weaknesses, knocking them down one by one like dominoes. The all-out attack is a crescendo that usually ends normal encounters, and even if it doesn't, leaves an impact on the enemy that feels so much more substantial than chipping away with normal attacks would. The constant build and release creates a lovely rhythm to combat, like the build-up and drop of an EDM song that feels satisfying even after you've heard it 1,000 times. If your all-out attack manages to sync up with the chorus of the battle theme Mass Destruction, well, nothing tops that. Uh-oh, did I hear someone mention a song? That means it's time for our next segment, Persona 3, the best music in gaming. By now everyone knows the incredible quality of this series' soundtracks, largely credited to the legendary composer Shoji Meguro. Each Persona soundtrack has its own identity, with Meguro pulling from different genres to craft that game's aesthetic just as much as the visuals do. At the same time, each game sounds recognizably Persona, with Meguro's specific compositional quirks tying them all together. It's not just Meguro, though. Atlus has a whole suite of excellent composers who lend their talent to the games and their spin-offs. Atsushi Kitajo in particular does an excellent job following the identity Meguro established that his work is often credited to Meguro. That sucks for him! For Persona 3, a reboot that put itself on the cutting edge of what was considered cool at the time, Meguro decided to go with what was cool at the time: hip-hop and electronica. Of course, the rock and jazz that's the bedrock of his work is also weaved in and out of the compositions. One of the defining qualities of Persona soundtrack is the prevalent use of vocals, something only sparingly featured in most game soundtracks. Vocals elevate the songs to a point where the brain starts to categorize them as standalone songs rather than songs from something. Most of the songs also have English lyrics, so us here in the West can latch on to them more than you'd expect from a Japanese game. Funnily enough, the reason English is used is to attain the opposite effect in the game's home country. If the lyrics are in a language Japanese players don't understand, it fades into the background and works as soundtrack music better. I think it works out great in English-speaking countries anyway. Since Persona 3 is such a hip-hop inspiration, and there are a lot of vocal tracks, there's gotta be a rapper. The resident rap artist of Persona is Lotus Juice, and if you're wondering if he's a good rapper, what matters is we love and support him. The singing is handled by Yumi Kamamura, whose deep and coarse voice lends a stoic maturity to the game's sound. The music does some heavy lifting in selling Persona 3's melancholy.
The city theme, When the Moon's Reaching Out Stars, great job on the title, fellas, has a smooth electronic groove with enough pep to match the daytime, but not so much that it betrays its protagonist's apathetic nature. The lyrics remind that this game's about death and ephemerality, evoking someone who is clinging to love as their last hope in life, but second-guessing whether even that could last. Just as fitting are the Dark Hour tracks, with the main battle theme, Mass Destruction, being the most memorable. Who could forget? And with that, it's time to count down the top 10 Persona songs of all time. Number 10, Wake Up, Get Out There from Persona 5. I do that every day. So relatable. Number 9, Freedom Buzz Dance from Persona 5 Strikers. Remember folks, Persona 5 Strikers is Persona 5 too. 8, When Mother Was There from Persona 5. This song title doubles the song's quality. 7, Pursuing My True Self from Persona 4. Chihoko Hirata takes over rap duties from Lotus Juice and we forgive her for it. Number 6, Heaven from Persona 4. Oh, that poor little girl. Number 5, Whims of Fate from Persona 5. This song makes me wish I was a casino. Number 4, Time from Persona 3. Makes me sentimental for a game I'm literally playing right now. Number 3, Last Surprise from Persona 5. The only real surprise is that there are 2 songs I like more. Number 2, Corridor from Persona 4. Like other aspects of the game, Persona 4's best song is its quietest. And of course, here are some honorable mentions. And number 1 is Kimi no Kyoku from Persona 3. I don't need to speak Japanese to understand what this song is saying. Luckily, I do speak it, and it makes me cry. I think it might be time for me to balance my praise of Persona 3 with some unbiased critiques, and to make it even more fair, I'll start with the big one. The One More system made me appreciate turn-based combat again after falling out of love with it, and for a long time was my shining example of RPG battling. But 10 years since I discovered it, after thousands of battles across 2 playthroughs of Persona 3, 1.5 playthroughs of Persona 4, 2 playthroughs of Persona 5, and complete playthroughs of a bunch of other RPGs with their own combat systems, I have to finally admit that Persona's combat isn't actually that good. It's not bad, it's still more compelling than like a default battle system would be, but it's far from the most engaging turn-based battle system. Since your goal is nearly always to knock all the enemies down and get an all-out attack, there's little room for experimentation or expression. Once you've learned an enemy's weaknesses, maybe after the first or second encounter with them, you just hit them with that element over and over again. The strategy is prescribed to you, and in long dungeon crawl sessions, you can start to question why the game even needs you to input commands. There are occasions where you can't just hammer an enemy's weakness, like if your party doesn't have the right element available or you're trying to conserve mana. Boss fights also force more active and thoughtful play, as they rarely have weaknesses to exploit, but it isn't always enough. A good turn-based battle system requires strategy and planning while allowing for players to express themselves through their own approach to a situation. The pitfall of Persona's combat is that in most standard battles, there is a correct answer, and since the game has no execution or timing to play with, there's no barrier to supplying that answer. Even still, battles in Persona are not bad, and in my opinion, one aspect of Persona 3's combat puts it above the combat of Persona 4 and 5. In Persona 4, enemies can be weak to an element: fire, wind, ice, lightning, light, and dark, as well as physical damage. Persona 5 has the added attributes of gun, psychic, and nuclear damage. Persona 3 lacks those additions, but instead splits physical damage into 3 categories: slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage. Extra attributes make Persona 5's combat system better than Persona 4's, but the physical split makes Persona 3's better than 5's. Having different physical attack types adds viability to party members with high strength, as well as adds another vector to plan your team around. Every party member has a different type of weapon they use, and those weapons have different damage types. Yukari's bow deals piercing damage, while Junpei's sword deals slashing, for instance. Yukari excels in magic and healing, so normally, the only time she would use a weapon attack is if she's out of SP. However, at the start of the game, she's the only party member who deals piercing damage. Now there are occasions where using her bow is actually warranted. Party composition isn't just about having someone who heals, someone who hits hard, and someone who casts magic. You want to make sure you cover as many magic elements as possible, while also taking into consideration what weapons everyone uses. More things to plan for means more gaps in what your party can do at any given moment, means more battles in which simply knocking everything down and getting an all-out attack isn't possible. It culminates in Persona 3 having more encounter variety, as well as making the time when you do get an all-out attack more gratifying. Encounters are only half of the dungeon crawl experience though. What Persona 3 can lack in battle, it makes up for in macro level management.
Like any good RPG, you need to maintain your HP and SP levels while dungeoneering. HP is easy enough, SP is the real drain. Most enemy weaknesses are elemental, so you need to be constantly using SP to cast elemental spells. Doing this every single battle, though, will quickly drain your party's SP, and could leave you without resources when you reach a boss fight. Not to mention the fact that healing spells also use SP, so running out of SP can mean running out of HP. The clash between using what you need in battle and conserving resources always plays into these kinds of games, but the extra pressure of the calendar makes it even more tangible. You really want to make your SP last so that you can spend as few days as possible exploring Tartarus.
Fess or Portable is go. This time we're talking about gameplay differences. There's one more macro element people have to manage in Persona 3, and it's one the later games ditched entirely: exhaustion. Fighting shadows is hard work, so if you spend too long in Tartarus in a single night, your party starts to feel tired. And when they're tired, buddy, you better bench them fast. They take considerably more damage and deal considerably less. They're basically as good as dead, and will also be dead every fight if you keep using them. Exhaustion is the final nail in the coffin for players that want to clear a whole section of Tartarus in a single day. That's pretty much every player, so everyone hates it. As such, for the portable release, exhaustion is heavily mitigated. Characters only become tired the day after they explore, meaning you can do as much as you want in a single day, you just can't dungeon dive 2 days in a row. They also get exhausted if their HP reaches 0, but hey, you should be trying to avoid that anyway. That's a point in Portable's favor. For everyone but me, anyway, exhaustion is not fun, and I want to spend my days as efficiently as possible, but exhaustion fits the design of the game so well. In my book, anything that makes the two halves of the game feel like two sides of the same coin, as opposed to different games smashed together, is a good thing. Exhaustion forces the player to engage with the scheduling aspect of Persona 3, even when they're doing RPG battles. It's not necessarily fun to deal with, but its effect on the game is a net positive. Portable also adds a device on the first floor of Tartarus that can fully restore the party for a fee, another convenience feature that makes it easier to explore Tartarus longer. Or as I like to say, another feature that makes everyone happy but me. Plus, in Fess, the protagonists can use any type of melee weapon to better fit team composition. In Portable, they always use slashing weapons, limiting what's so great about having multiple physical types in the first place. Looks like when it comes to gameplay, Fess is getting an uncontested What's that? You can't control your party members in Fess? They're all AI, so you just have to pray they do the right thing, and the game feels like luck more than anything? Forget everything I just said. Portable is the only way anyone should ever play this game.
The last topic to discuss in regards to the RPG side of Persona 3 is Tartarus itself. It is perhaps the most common criticism of Persona 3's gameplay. Tartarus has 264 randomly generated floors to fight through, and those floors blend together instantly. None of the pieces that make up a floor stand out, and there's never anything to interact with outside of treasure chests. The search for the stairs quickly becomes dull. A fresh coat of paint is thankfully given to each section of the tower, but the visual refresh does not sustain interest for long. The music doesn't help much either. It's a very basic song and not on a too long loop. I personally find the song quite enjoyable, but I recognize it's not good enough to justify how much you'll be hearing it. One thing I do love, though, is that the one song builds over the course of the game. Every new block of Tartarus adds something to the instrumentation. What starts as a single piano chord and some glitchy, understated percussion transforms into a full song with strings and melodies. I'd say that seeing how the song will change was one of my main motivators for progressing through Tartarus. Still, the bottom line is that Tartarus is very, very, very repetitive. It lacks any notable features that make an RPG dungeon worthwhile, and there's more than enough of it for any player to reasonably stomach. Acknowledging that will allow me to go on a far-fetched tangent. Tartarus is repetitive, dull, and needs to be done anyway. It feels like homework. Homework in the school simulation game. You see where I'm going with this? You see, it's actually good that Tartarus sucks, because it expertly mirrors that side of school life. The awful busy work that needs to be done simply because the authority figure says it needs. You know what? It's fine. Tartarus sucks. I don't need to defend it. Persona 3 was the first game in the series to try out the genre blend, and as such, has its fair share of quirks that were changed for later entries. With the memories of those later games more fresh in my mind, I was shocked to find how much more of the dating sim side of Persona 3 is driven by mechanics and player choice. This revelation hit after just a few hours of play, when I realized that I had access to 8 social links within the first in-game month. That is twice as many as what Persona 5 unlocks in the same time frame. This is the first sign that Persona 3's dating sim inspirations run deeper than the later games. In most dating sims, you're introduced to the full cast of characters up front and then get to choose who to pursue in that playthrough. Persona 3 follows suit by dishing out half of its social links right away, letting the player gravitate to whoever they want. Persona 4 and 5 allow plenty of choices for potential friends, but the way they're doled out throughout the game means that players will generally socialize with one group at the start of the game, another group in the middle, and another near the end. By giving so many options at once, Persona 3 allows the player to really carve out their own social circle. This effect is heightened by the way the rest of the social links are unlocked. While all links only become available after a certain date, that time threshold is much earlier than you would likely reach them. The real gate to the other links is social links. At rank 4 of nearly every one of the first social links you get, you will hear some information that leads you to another. The old couple will lead you to meeting Bebe. Playing the MMO will have Maya telling you about Tanaka. Spending time with Maiko in the park will have you run into someone else who visits the park, etc. Maiko is also an example of how some links require some light adventure gamey questing, requesting a specific food and drink from the player before she's willing to talk. Honestly, this way of unlocking links feels a lot more realistic. You meet people through the people you already know. Being able to pursue the people you want and continuing to expand your social circle through them lets Persona 3 flex the role-playing aspect of RPGs a lot more. In my first playthrough 10 years ago, in a retrospectively sad parallel to my real life, I spent all my time with the first person at school who talked to me and barely participated in any extracurricular activities. This led me to becoming best friends with Kenji, an unmotivated, selfish, and judgmental high school boy who nevertheless needs a friend. Kenji, along with the kind old couple who run the used bookstore, carried me through the early game. By the end of the game, in a retrospectively sad parallel to my real life, my protagonist was someone who knew a lot of people a little bit, but only got close to a few people, and was hesitant to put themselves out there and try new things. In my playthrough for this video, I went for all the social links I neglected the first time, and the protagonist was a different person for it. Instead of wasting my time with Kenji, side note, it's really nice they bundled these two guys together so you can easily skip them both. Thanks, Atlas! I joined a sports team and became friends with Kazushi, a fellow athlete who shares the same homeroom. Training after school introduced me to Yuko, the team manager, who I would go on to spend Christmas with. Competing in the sports meet had me run into a star athlete from another school, Mamoru. Before I knew it, in stark contrast to my real life, my protagonist was a jock, his social life most strongly tied to the swim team he joined in the first month of school. The range of options available even apply to the G in the same way as the RP. Since each link boosts the experience of personas with the matching arcana, the player is incentivized to use those personas over others. Personas of the same arcana tend to fill similar roles in combat. Hermit personas, for example, excel in applying status effects, while priestess personas learn more healing abilities. Befriending Kenji in my first playthrough meant I leaned heavily on his magician arcana, becoming the premier magic damage dealer of my party. The chariot and strength arcanas from the sports social links I prioritized this time around made me fill the opposite role, being the big physical damage dealer and tank. Different arcanas always serve as loose character classes in these games, but Persona 3's openness on the social link side lets players pick their class more than ever. Of course, any player's objective is to complete all the social links by the end of the game, and if they do that, the roleplay aspect is strongly limited. Something that colored the first half of the game, but fades away by the end. It's unlikely that would happen for the average Persona 3 player, however. The calendar is much tighter in this game, having far less time slots available to raise all the social stats to max and complete every social link. The game taking place from April to January is deceiving. You get far fewer days than actually exist in those months. The game constantly skips forward through time, sometimes for understandable reasons like being in the hospital, sometimes for confusing reasons like the game deciding you don't get to play through that week. Seasonal exams take up a whole week, and the week prior to them prevents any classmate social links from being progressed. There are many situations in which you might think you have a clear schedule until the game throws a wrench in the works. It's possible to do everything in a single playthrough, but unless you're using a day-to-day guide, it won't happen. While that is annoying for anyone who hates having to replay a game to see all it has to offer, it also enhances the importance of effective scheduling, makes player decisions more meaningful, and adds replayability. Persona 3 is by no means a short game, but it is short in comparison to the games that followed it. Both of my playthroughs clocked in at just over 40 hours, and if you do a New Game Plus run, you can trim that time substantially by carrying over your max stats and skipping scenes you've already watched. I should acknowledge that everyone I know finished the game with many more hours than me, but even so, the final time was below Persona 4 and 5. Replaying Persona 3 is a big time commitment, but its stronger focus on the mechanics and decision-making of the social side make a second playthrough more rewarding. If you're playing portable, that second playthrough is highly encouraged. Taking advantage of the lower development cost of the PSP, this version adds the single greatest feature any Persona game has ever received: a second playable character. In Persona 3 Portable, you can play as a girl. Letting the female players have that option is great on its own, but the game the female protagonist stars in is notably different from her male counterpart. The gameplay and narrative stay the same, but everything else shifts. The male protagonist is reserved and apathetic, with many of his dialogue options being cold and unfeeling, and that's reflected by the overwhelming use of blue as well as the soundtrack. In contrast, the female protagonist is upbeat and cheerful, always smiling and ready to offer support to her friends. As such, the blue is swapped out for pink, completely changing the game's vibe. If that's not enough, this route features an all-new soundtrack, using much of the same styles as the base soundtrack, but injecting more positive and poppy elements as well. The real draw of the female route, though, is the fact that almost half of the social links are different from the male route. Characters that didn't have them before now do. Old links are modified to reflect the new character, and even a few wholly new links are available. Playing as a girl is a substantially new experience, and honestly, it's a better one. The music, with the battle theme being the one major exception, is all around better, and the social links are more fleshed out. I'm someone who likes to experience a game in its original form as often as possible, so I have a hard time recommending people play as a girl first, but if you're only going to play Persona 3 once, the female route might be the right call.
And that leads to our last installment of FES or Portable. This time we have to compare the added features from each version and see how they stack up. Portable comes in strong with a whole alternate, better version of the game, but FES has something up its sleeve. Exclusive to Persona 3 FES is The Answer, a 30-hour epilogue that wraps up loose ends, clarifies confusing plot elements, and offers even more Persona 3 goodness. And by Persona 3 goodness, I mean extended dungeon crawling through yet more randomly generated floors and nothing else. No exams or hangouts this time around. All turn-based RPG battles I've already said are not the game's strong suit. I find the narrative additions in The Answer deeply compelling, possibly even essential to the game's plot as a whole, but actually playing through it for that narrative is a tall order I still haven't done myself. The Answer gets a read the wiki out of 10, and as such, Portable wins the bonus content round. That leaves our final tally in favor of Portable. Play Portable, guys. I mean, that's the version that just got re-released everywhere anyway, so it's not like you were going to play FES even if you wanted to. That's it.
Persona 3's heavier inspiration from the dating sim genre leads to one misstep that, while small, has a large effect. The genre is called a dating simulator, and obviously the goal of these games is to end up dating someone. Persona 3 follows suit, with the male protagonist able to date any of his female classmates, while the female protagonist can date any of her male ones. On the male route, however, there's a bit of a snag here. Social links with female students are inherently romantic, and progress along a romantic arc whether the player wants that or not. No turning down the girl and simply staying friends. By rank 10, she's your girlfriend. That applies to all of the girls, so if you happen to do the totally normal action of doing multiple girls' social links, you'll end up dating all those girls at the same time. The game doesn't call attention to this at all, and it's not something that would bother every player, but it always feels wrong for me. It makes me feel guilty for even talking to more than one girl, and it reflects an extremely outdated attitude that guys and girls can't simply be friends. There's also a mechanic tied to this. If you start to reach the later romantic ranks of a girl's link, she can become jealous of other girls. Neglecting that girl and reaching higher ranks with another can lead to the first girl's social link reversing, too angry at the protagonist for being a two-timer. It's a rare occurrence, almost requiring the player to specifically set up a situation in which it happens, but it is nonetheless in the game. I'd always hated this mechanic and wondered why it was even included, but I did happen to see a video about one of the first dating simulators and learned that jealousy mechanics were something incorporated in the genre. So, at least now I have an answer. The team seemed to have learned all this is not ideal, so later Persona games removed the jealousy mechanic and added a non-romantic option with any would-be partners. Since the female route was added many years later, after the release of Persona 4, it also received these changes, marking yet another reason it's the superior way to play the game. Persona 3 remains a novel mix of dating sim and RPG, even compared to its sequels, but all the mechanical novelty in the world wouldn't be able to save the game if the social links weren't worth playing for. It's fortunate that they definitely are, then. The extended cast not only exemplifies how different people across the city are, but also how those different people are connected by life's endings and beginnings. There's varying degrees of weight to how that theme is portrayed in each link, but that tend to go hand in hand with who that person is and where they are in life. The team manager Yuko's link concerns her lack of ambition and indecisiveness on what her life will be like after graduation. She doesn't know what her new life will be as her current life ends. It's the kind of thing that feels enormous to a high schooler, but pales in comparison with the severity of something like the old couple's story. Bunkichi and Mitsuko lost their son a few years ago. He was a full-grown man, a teacher at Gekkoukan, but that kind of thing hardly matters to how it affects a parent who lost their child. At first, they seem to have accepted their loss as much as parents can. When they learn that a tree planted in their son's honor at the school is going to be removed, that acceptance is shattered. As long as that tree was there, they felt like there was still some part of their son in the world. If it's gone, then so is their son. The tree is the primary plot of their social link, and an obvious incorporation of the death theme, but it's not the only one. After meeting with the couple a few times, it becomes clear that Bunkichi is plagued with dementia. He constantly forgets names, where he put things, and what time it is. Most tragically, he forgets that his son died. Mitsuko has to gently remind him of the truth. The two of them come to terms with the tree's removal when they learn the school is building more facilities in its place, but Bunkichi's mental state is never resolved because it can't be. It's an undercurrent of their story that reminds them that they too are nearing the end of their life. I could continue to list each link and how they represent the game's themes, but that's unnecessary when there's one that encapsulates everything the game is trying to say. Oddly enough, it's perhaps the most difficult link to find. Locked behind rank 4 of the little girl who demands food to even speak with you, and then only available to meet one day a week, is a young man named Akinari. Born with a rare disease, Akinari is going to die soon. There's nothing that can be done to stop it. He's always known he would die young, and that knowledge has caused him to wallow in anguish his whole life. His conversations flip back and forth between hopeless acceptance and anger at his lot in life. Death has been a presence in Akinari's life more so than most, to the point that he doubts life has a purpose at all. Nonetheless, he's furious that he doesn't get to have a full one. He has an affinity for books, but doesn't like to finish them. Endings seem to make him uncomfortable. As his life finally reached its own conclusion, Akinari decides he wants to write a story of his own, hoping it will somehow help him figure out what the meaning behind his existence was. The story of a pink alligator who is ostracized for his differences sounds like a children's story, only to end in an almost comically depressing fashion. Over the course of the social link, however, Akinari's justified angst fades little by little. He adjusts the story, giving the alligator a lone friend and lightening things up. He keeps the downer ending of the alligator's death, even adding in more horrific details like him eating his only friend and crying so hard he drowns himself. But now, the alligator's lake of tears becomes an oasis that sustains the whole community. By the end, Akinari realizes that he can't give his life meaning, because the meaning of one's life can only be decided by those around them. Supporting the ones close to you is what matters, and when you go, the mark you leave on them is what matters most. Akinari dies before you reach rank 10, leaving you the lone manuscript of his finished story. There is a finality to many of Persona 3's social links. None so much as Akinari, of course, but the rank 10 conversation is the last time you'll see many of your friends. Maiko moves away, Bebe goes back home, Utatsu returns to his family. These relationships aren't lifelong, they're ephemeral, but that doesn't mean they have to mean anything less. The end of your relationships is a new beginning for the ones that leave, and they take all they learned from your time together with them. The transient nature of the social links in this game is yet another way they're different from what came later, one that strongly enforces the game's tone and theme. Other ways Persona 3's social link differ aren't as much of a slam dunk. There are a higher number of social link characters that are just unpleasant. The old monk Mutatsu is abrasive, immoral, and mean until his last few scenes. The Gourmet King is pitiful and a scam artist and a death cultist, and Tanaka is the worst kind of criminal. A white-collar one. Also, he's generally creepy and predatory, especially for playing as a girl, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's just a normal kind of criminal too. On all fronts, these characters aren't people you want to spend time with, and for lots of players that means they're bad social links. I don't agree, except in the Gourmet King's case. I think characters like Mutatsu and Tanaka add interesting texture and variety to the city of Iwatodai. Not everyone is lovable and sympathetic. Some people have done bad things, and yet more aren't even close to apologetic about it. One complaint I can't deny, though, is that the links are leaner overall. It's obvious this is the team's first try at this kind of thing. Lots of the stories are unoriginal or cliched, like Kazushi's story of a young sports star whose injury might put them out of commission for good. The total content of each link is also slighter. There's just less words in each scene, and that means each character is less fleshed out than the ones you find in Persona 4 and 5. Too many ranks are pure filler. Every character needs to fill 10 ranks of scenes, but the writers struggled to give those to each character. Bebe is one of my favorite characters in the game, but once he decides to sew a kimono around the halfway point, the rest of his link is him making incremental progress on the garment and not much else. There simply isn't 10 ranks worth of content for a lot of these characters. Other big offenders include Chihiro, whose central conflict doesn't even arise till rank 7, and Mitsuru, with half of her scenes being eating at different restaurants. Now, it might be alarming that Mitsuru, a central character in the game, has one of the poorer social links. But it could be worse. She could be Fuka. Or even worse, she could be any of the male party members. What is likely the most common criticism of Persona 3 social links is the fact that none of the male party members even have them. It doesn't make sense, does it? In a game that places so much importance on its characters, and neglects to let players get to know some of its core cast better. Here is where I make my most controversial but most passionate claim. Neglecting party member social links was the right call. Okay, let me immediately walk that back a bit by saying the female route adds social links for the male party members, and those links are great and really add a lot to each of those characters, except Ken, which it gets so unbelievably wrong, it almost ruins the female route entirely. Anyway, let me at least try to argue my point. As I said before, the main plot of Persona 3 is slimmer than lots of RPGs, instead putting its cast front and center. The mission of Seas is known and completed methodically, so the actual conflicts in each arc are wholly centered around the cast butting heads with each other and overcoming their weaknesses. A social link is typically following a character as they overcome their biggest problem and better themselves. For Persona 3's main cast, their social links are the main story. The issues that Junpei, for example, would work through in his social link are instead woven into the plot, happening organically over the course of the game. That same reason is why the girls, who do have social links, have some of the weaker ones. Their real arc isn't contained in them. The fact that girls have them at all, and especially that the female route added them for the boys, is nonetheless a good argument for party members having social links. The character's arc being built into the narrative doesn't have to mean their social links will be bad. Seeing other sides of those characters is valuable, and the male party members' links are among the best in the game. Despite that, I still think it was pivotal that they were skipped over in the game's original version for two reasons. The first reason is that, with fewer social link slots taken up by party members, there's more room for the kind of characters that only get to be social links. No matter how much I like the party members, I appreciate getting to know as many people as possible in Iwatodai. The second reason can be explained by looking at Persona 4 and Persona 5. Both of those games have social links for all your party members, and most of those links are good. They are, however, optional. Because the player can delay their completion, or even skip them entirely, none of the developments those characters have in their social links can be carried over to the main story. Not only does this make the social links feel inconsequential, it also has the nasty side effect of tucking most of the characters' details into the social links. Party members in 4 and 5 get a chance to shine and develop during the part of the story in which they join you, but once they do, they all remain fairly static for the rest of the game. They don't develop because their part of the story is done and the game needs to move on with the plot, and they have their own social links to learn more about them anyway. By neglecting to even give the boys social links, and by skimping out on the girls, Persona 3 is able to sidestep these issues and let these characters meaningfully evolve over the game's year. The slow burn of development the cast gets, alongside the more workplace relationship everyone has with each other, makes them less likable up front, but cements them as my favorite RPG party by the end of the game. No one exemplifies this as much as Junpei Iori. For so much of the game, he exhibits every negative trait a young man could have: unfounded confidence, entitlement, jealousy, and the constant need to harass women. I don't think the writers intended Junpei to be as unlikable as he is. I think lots of those qualities were things they assumed audiences would shake off with an eye roll or a groan. The end result is the exact kind of guy I didn't want to be friends with in high school. The attribute that annoys me the most about Junpei is his two-facedness. The protagonist is given the role of a leader on C's missions due to his unique persona capabilities. This irritates Junpei to no end. Why him? Why can't I be the leader? He thinks. The reason, obviously, is that Junpei has no sense of strategy, treats battles like a game, and has never shown himself to be capable in any way that surpasses the others. That doesn't stop Junpei from feeling entitled to the job simply because he's a guy that wants it. The jealousy is irritating though, and it's even worse if you're playing as a girl. Junpei specifically called out how ridiculous it is to put a girl in charge over him. Despite all that, he still acts like he's your best friend, joking and palling around while his disdain grows and grows. His animosity only comes out at the worst times, like during the first full moon mission. Having just been passed over as leader, Junpei ignores orders to stick around and rushes ahead, saying he can take the boss down on his own. Even though that situation is salvaged, Junpei shows on his very first mission that he places personal glory over the well-being of others. Halfway through the game, Junpei's jealousy reaches such a fever pitch that it forces him to actually do some introspection. He doesn't come to a realization, he admits something he himself has always known. Junpei's confidence and jealousy only stem from his own sense of worthlessness. He knows that he's unremarkable, but joining C's finally made him unique. Finally, he could be a hero. When the reality of the situation crept in, like when he wasn't miraculously put in charge or when going out on his own didn't pan out, it only reminded him that even with his new powers, he wasn't good enough. He dealt with this through denial and lashing out at others. By accepting his own insecurities, Junpei allows himself to be who he really is and to rely on other people. He apologizes for his behavior and recommits to seize his mission. And even though that puts him past most of his issues, there still remains his poor treatment of women. Fairly soon after Junpei admits his faults, he meets a girl named Chidori. She's about as far from what you imagine Junpei would be attracted to as possible. Her gothic Lolita style makes her stick out like a sore thumb. She portrays no emotion and is deeply pessimistic. Somehow though, she strikes a chord with Junpei, who goes out of his way to approach her like a human being. A first for him talking to a girl. Chidori has never had anyone show genuine interest in her, so she disregards Junpei's friendliness at first. Junpei persists anyway, and over repeated meetings, Chidori lets down her guard ever so slightly, and Junpei realizes he's developing real feelings for her. The romance is doomed, however, as Chidori is a member of Strega, a gang of enemy persona users. She uses Junpei's affection to help her gang attack C's, though they were unsuccessful and Chidori ends up in the hospital under C's supervision. She is interrogated by them, but Junpei can't see her as an enemy, constantly visiting her in the hospital and doubling down on his feelings for her. He learns that her persona allows her to revitalize things around her, though it comes at the cost of her own life force. Near the end of the game, Strega attacks once again and Junpei ends up shot. Chidori cements her turn on Strega by healing Junpei, giving her life in the process. As she dies, she thanks Junpei for making her life feel like it was worth living, and their two personas fuse together. On a literal level, Chidori leaves a mark on Junpei's very soul, becoming the source of his power. The Junpei at the end of the game, one who has accepted his faults, and one who has found power in true connections, is a far cry from the Junpei at its beginning. He isn't done growing up yet, but he is well on the way of becoming a man. Not what his pubescent idea of a man is, but a real man who respects the world and his place in it. Aside from Junpei, all the other boys have their stories intertwined with each other. Akihiko and Shinjiro are childhood friends. They, along with Akihiko's sister Maki, lived in an orphanage together. At some point, a fire broke out and Maki didn't make it. Akihiko's failure to save his sister is what pushes him to train so hard, thinking pure strength is what he lacked. When the two entered high school, they were both recruited into C's for their potential to use personas. Working with Mitsuru, the three were the team's first iteration. This didn't last too long. While on a mission, Shinjiro lost control of his persona, rampaging and causing collateral damage. That damage unfortunately included a human woman. Shinji promptly left the group and dropped out of school, living alone on the streets. He fears using his persona again, knowing he could easily lose control and kill someone else. To curb this, he starts to take an experimental medicine that stabilizes his persona. The only downside is that it also slowly kills him. Ken is a 10-year-old boy who attends Gekkokan's middle school. He somewhat unceremoniously joins the team one day, not getting the attention other new members receive. All we really know about him is that he's an orphan, and he likes to act more mature than he is. He sticks to Akihiko early, aspiring to be as strong and cool as him. He does the opposite to Shinji, keeping his distance. We learn why during the October mission. Ken and Shinji are missing when the team needs to fight another large shadow. They can't waste time looking for them, so the player has to fight that boss without those two. Once it's dealt with, Fuga's able to track them to an alley in the middle of town. What they find is a dying Shinjiro. While Seize was occupied with the shadow, Ken asks Shinji to meet him there. Ken reveals that the woman Shinji killed when he lost control was actually Ken's mother, and avenging her was his key motivation for joining Seize. Shinji doesn't try to resist. Before Ken makes a killing blow, Takaya, the leader of Strega, shows up. Seeing that he has caught part of Seize alone, he decides to kill the two of them, starting with Ken. Just as he pulls the trigger of his revolver, Shinji jumps in the way of the bullet. Seize arrives, Takaya flees, and Shinji can't be saved. As he lay dying, Shinji tells Ken that his life is worth living, stating that he knows Ken planned to end his own life after avenging his mother. Ken is thrown into a hurricane of conflicting emotions. He came here to kill Shinji, but now he's dead because he saved Ken's life. The one thing he's had in mind since being orphaned is done, and in the last way he expected. Was the person who killed his mother a good person after all? If Shinji sacrificed himself for him, how could he throw that away and end his own life? Ken is not a very popular character. Kid characters in games tend to be unpopular due to their tendency to exhibit all the stereotypically negative qualities of children while being unconvincingly voiced by adults. It was already an uphill battle for Ken to be likable, but getting the coolest party member killed right after he joins the team puts him at the bottom of the stack for lots of players. I was one of those people when I first played the game. My opinion has changed over time. The circumstance may have gotten Shinji killed, but Ken didn't do the killing. He intended to, but he didn't get to. The scene is less about portraying Ken negatively as it is about portraying Shinji positively. Shinjiro was not going to live much longer anyway. His persona suppressants were killing him. In a way, taking the bullet for Ken was an ideal situation for Shinji. Instead of his body wasting away, he can give his life to accomplish something worthwhile. By saving the son of the woman he killed, he can atone for his past mistake. For Ken's part, the fact that someone so young had determined the best course of action was a murder-suicide is dark. It's proof of how much weight he carries. As a teenager, I hated Ken for being a stupid kid that got someone killed. As an adult, I sympathize with what Ken had to go through and applaud him for the positive turn he takes following the incident. He lets go of his hatred, forgives Shinjiro, and accepts the loss of his mother. The most mature thing Ken does is allow himself to be a kid, freeing himself of what haunted him and embracing his just starting life. Akihiko greatly mourns the loss of his old friend. He's not just someone he grew up with, he's the only link that remained to his childhood. And while he exhibits all the stages of grief, he does so in just a scene or two. Akihiko is the most static character in Persona 3, but in his case, that's a positive thing. He's the strong, driven upperclassman that pushes Seize into action. When the rest of the cast is dealing with problems and evolving, Akihiko's reliability is what makes him stand out. His true hurdle, the death of his little sister, is something Akihiko wrestled with prior to the events of the game. The pressure he feels to get stronger shows that he isn't completely over it, but it's also a sign that he's already decided the path forward for himself. Losing Shinji is a great blow, but Akihiko's already learned how to take some hits. Let me pause one last time to acknowledge some things. Persona 3 is nearly 20 years old and it was made in Japan. There is no way this game was going to be without its share of distasteful aspects. For instance, even though I think Junpei's arc is wonderfully done, I do have some qualms with the Chidori storyline. The relationship they develop with each other is unexpected and cute, but by the end of it, Chidori is just a tool used to develop Junpei further. She's her own character with her own path and issues, yet those issues mostly serve as a way to have Junpei save her. It's sadly common for stories to use female characters as props to serve their male ones, and Persona 3 shouldn't get a pass for doing it, no matter how much I love it. Unfortunately, there's some other things the game shouldn't get a pass for. There's some bad scenes in this game. Some really bad scenes. Some really bad scenes. Fan service and the objectification of women sadly seem to go hand in hand with anything anime tinged, and Persona 3 is no different. Yukari gets it the worst, having a whole anime cutscene purely devoted to her taking a shower. The aforementioned hot spring scene, in which the guys try to spy on the girls, is supposed to be a comedic one, but it's just uncomfortable. The boys get caught, and the girls hit them a lot for being perverts, so the joke is that they get punished for their wrongdoing. Counterpoint, it's a really creepy thing to do, and it makes me like everyone involved less. The worst offender is a sequence called Operation Babe Hunt, in which the boys try to pick up girls on the beach. Again, the joke is on the boys. None of the girls are interested, and they all realize that they're stupid teenagers who have no idea how to talk to girls. The issue comes with the last woman they talk to, who's more receptive to their advantage until they realize, it's not a girl. Oh boy, well, that's how fun, it's how gross, how dare they. Scenes like this suck really bad, and even if you could try to excuse it by saying the game is from a different time, that doesn't work when the developers are doing the same kind of things 10 years later in Persona 5. These sequences aren't enough to really hamper my enjoyment of the game, but I can't blame anyone if they are, and it wouldn't be right just to gloss over them. I swear that they do handle the portrayal of at least some women well, though. The girls are actually my favorite characters in the game, Yukari and Mitsuru in particular. Their dynamic, going from passive animosity to close friends, is my favorite relationship between the party members. Mitsuru, to me, is the standout though. Full transparency. Mitsuru is not only my favorite character in the game, not only my favorite character from any video game, she is my favorite character, period. She makes a strong impression early on, having one of the best designs in the game. She's an upperclassman, knows how to fence, basically runs Cs, and rides a motorcycle. She's almost too cool, and that's enough for anyone to throw her onto the team when she becomes available. Honestly, I don't think I'd need to justify my affinity for her beyond I think she's super cool. Luckily, I can. I like lots of cool characters, but that's not enough to make them my favorite. Mitsuru stands above the rest because I find her deeply relatable. I've always been something of a goody two-shoes, especially when I was in school. I never broke the rules, I respected authority figures, and I prided myself on being a good student. I literally cried the first time I got a C on a test. Mitsuru is much the same, only she would never stoop so low as to ever get a C. She is the optimal student, straight A's, popular, and president of the student council. She's certainly naturally gifted in those areas, but she excels through effort and privilege. Her father is the owner of the Kirijo Group, a massive company that happened to build the school she attends. Connections give her opportunity, and money lets her family pay other people to do the menial things while Mitsuru can focus on her responsibilities. Unlike a typical rich kid though, Mitsuru takes her responsibilities deadly seriously. They're the only thing she concerns herself with. She spends all of her time doing what's expected of her to the point that she doesn't even know what it's like to be a teenager. The early ranks of her social link are all about taking her to do things other kids do, things she's never done before. It's highly exaggerated, but the essence of that, denying yourself of teenage experiences in order to become some fabled good kid, is something I really connected with. Even still, Mitsuru wasn't my favorite character. That only came when her story showed how fragile of an identity the model student is. The reason Mitsuru is so diligent is because she wants to make her father proud and uphold the Kirijo name. Her dad is incredibly distant, geographically and emotionally, a perfect situation to cause a child to need their parents' approval. We only see her interact with her father once in the whole year, and he barely acknowledges her. Well, technically, we see one more interaction, but it's their last. Very late in the game, the team is blindsided by a trusted advisor betraying them. This advisor, Shuji Akutsuki, tricks C's to achieve his own goals and captures all of them. He's caught off guard by Mitsuru's father, and the two end up shooting each other. It saves the day, but unfortunately her father's wound is fatal. Mitsuru is forced to watch her father die. In the weeks that follow, she's a completely different person. She's unavailable to go to Tartarus, she hides in her room, and when you do see her, she barely speaks. Without her father, Mitsuru can't see a reason to keep going. If she isn't living for him, then who's she living for? Herself? If that's the case, it's a shame she hasn't spent any time developing a sense of self. Having a goal is fantastic, and being the kind of person who can actually stick to that goal is a rare gift. But if all you strive for in life is that one thing, everything else gets put to the side. And if that one thing falls apart, you're left with nothing. As a kid, being a good student was all I had to distinguish myself. Things came easily to me, I never had to worry about passing classes, and though I try not to show it, I liked the feeling of superiority it gave me. As lame as it might sound, when I got that C, it shattered me. I didn't know who I was anymore. If I was someone who could get a C, then I wasn't who I thought I was, and I had no idea who the real me is. It led to the worst year of my youth. I recovered by trying new things, going deeper into my hobbies, and realizing how important my friends had become to me. I got better, happier, but I could never care about school the same way I did before. A good student wasn't part of my identity anymore. Mitsuru goes through the motions of her life, keeps up appearances, but she's at a loss. She bounces back the same way I did. New experiences and friends. Mitsuru's social link only becomes available after her father's death, and her desire to try new things with the protagonist in the link isn't a coincidence. She only seeks those out when her old life path becomes obsolete. More so than anyone on the team, Mitsuru makes sure she is everyone's coworker, not their friend. Her loss forces her to realize that she can't get through life on her own, and that the people around her are reason enough to keep going. People are reason enough to keep going. It might sound like I've expressed that idea a few times in this video. I've only done so as much as Persona 3 itself does. In our modern world, where everyone cares about everything a lot, it's hard to remember how things were just a decade ago. A lot of positive momentum in the world was running out, leaving a feeling of hopelessness. That's the environment Persona 3 was made in. As the Shadows spread their influence over Iwatodai, more and more people come down with something called apathy syndrome. Those afflicted become emotionless husks. Rumors spread about its origins, burnout, sickness, people are just faking it. At the start of the school year, you see a few victims here and there. By the end, the city is filled with them. Apathy syndrome is the supernatural explanation for the nihilism of that era, a disease spreading through the world that threatens its end. The truth of it is tied to the truth of the Shadows. The 12 boss Shadows Seize takes down throughout the game are actually pieces of a greater whole. Nyx, the harbinger of death. When Nyx descends, the world will end. This isn't some evil god reveling in chaos, though. Nyx only exists because humanity wants it. Tapping into that union concept of the collective unconscious, Nyx is the embodiment of humanity's desire to die. Fighting against them is impossible, but Seize decides to try anyway. After overcoming their own hopelessness, they refuse to lose the optimism and friendship they worked so hard for. The fight itself is incredible as a capstone to Persona 3, but the curious thing about it is that even though this is a reboot, it could absolutely work as a finale to the whole franchise. The battle theme, the battle for everyone's souls, is essentially a heavy rock remix of the Velvet Room theme, the one connecting tissue of all 5 Persona games. Nyx shifts through 13 distinct phases, each of them changing their attacks and weaknesses as they count up through the Arcana, ending on number 13, Death. Stopping there is fitting for Persona 3, but incorporating the Arcana directly into the final boss like that brings home their significance. It's almost best for someone to play Persona 3 as the last game in the reboot trilogy, simply because it anachronistically feels like those 3 games led to this finale. That many phases in a fight makes it a gauntlet, and if I had to nitpick, I'd complain that the death phase takes as long as all those leading up to it. It doesn't really upset me though, because more so than the vast majority of final bosses, it feels like Seize is fighting Destiny. Seize saves the day, but Destiny can't be thwarted entirely. Defeating Nyx erases the Dark Hour, but that also erases all memories associated with it, including every fight Seize fought together. The game skips forward 2 months to the end of March, the week of graduation. The gang is split up, operating their normal lives as if the game never happened. Yukari and Junpei barely know their upperclassmen, Ken's completely disconnected, and Koromaru is a dog. The only ones who remember the Dark Hour are Aigis and the player. To defeat Nyx, the protagonist confronts their true form on their own, stopping their approach with the use of something called the Great Seal. We don't know what that entails, but we do know that for the 2 months following, the protagonist is very tired and needs to sleep early every day. On graduation day, the 2 that remember go to the rooftop of the school. Seize promised to meet there on the last day of school, hopeful that they could keep the memories despite the knowledge they couldn't. When the time comes, everyone has a nagging feeling they forgot something important, all of them unlocking their memories at the same time. They rush to the rooftop as the protagonist lays their head in Aigis' lap. They are heard opening the door as the screen fades to white and credits roll. For a little while, the ending was left up to interpretation, but the FES re-release gave us the answer. To form the Great Seal that stopped Nyx, the protagonist had to offer up their soul. It is only by sheer determination to keep their promise to meet their friends on graduation day that they were able to stay alive for another 2 months. So yes, to the surprise of everyone, you die at the end of the game about death. A tragic ending in any story, but especially cruel in this one. I can't be too sad that my character's dead, because I was done with the game anyway, so they were done interacting with that world either way. It's everyone else I'm sad for. Persona 3 is so determined to have the player get to know its people, get close to them, have them rely on the protagonist. It genuinely pains me to know that all those characters I love will have to go on without them. At the same time, that's the beauty of Persona 3. That's why it's still my favorite game ever. It was the first game to ever make me feel so connected to its world and characters. The way I chose who to interact with, how to spend my time, what mattered to me. It mirrored a real life, but so idealized and fanciful. It's a game so rooted in what I felt when I first played it. Depression, angst, death, nihilism. It wears those things on its sleeve, but it doesn't wallow in them. Persona 3 looks at that fatalistic negativity, breathes it in, and refutes it wholeheartedly. My character dying at the end could be a message that the whole thing is futile, that it didn't matter because it didn't last. In reality, it's just the opposite. The hero's death is a period at the end of the statement, life is short, so we need to make the most of it. Death is an end, but it's not the end. Life goes on, and even if you can't participate, you leave your mark.